Whether you're home or away, stay connected to your team with T-Mobile, the network that covers 99% of people in America. They've been investing billions to light up their best network ever. From your backyard to a sold-out stadium, get T-Mobile's best coverage yet. Plus, with T-Mobile, you get a price lock guarantee, so they won't raise the rate of your talk, text, and data, ever. There's never been a better time to switch. Visit your local T-Mobile store today. Coverage not available in some areas. Price lock exclusions like taxes, fees, select promos, and third-party services apply. See T-Mobile.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring an in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. We're here with our Indiana preview. Indiana visits Michigan State at the Breslin Center on Tuesday, late at night at 9 o'clock tip. Before we begin, I just want to offer a couple thanks to new supporter, Paul Marsh, who's a Draymond Green supporter. Thank you, Paul, and all the rest of you who support us on a monthly basis through Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, you can go to patreon.com/MSUTiffnots, or easier, just go to our website at thefinalfoursonthschedule.com/support. And there you can become a either one-time gift support through PayPal or Venmo, or a monthly supporter through Patreon. And you're the ones who really keep us going. And also, I think, we've had a rough week, obviously, with what's transpired at Michigan State. But I think a bright thing that's happened is, it wasn't that long ago. It was, I think, the 9th of February. We interviewed Mady Sissoko about his foundation, the Mady Sissoko Foundation.org, which you can find, where he talked about what he's doing for his home village back in Mali. He's building a school and I think a restroom and trying to get things so these kids don't have to walk forever to get to school. Not often do we have an opportunity to really change people's lives and affect them significantly, but this is certainly an opportunity. And we had a pledge made during that show. That pledge has been met. It's been matched. And so our show has raised at least $20,000 for this venture. I mean, it's the outpouring support from you guys has been really amazing. It's been a blessing to be a part of the show, a show that I enjoyed for so long, but also to be able to use something like this in sports for something that's more impactful, that's more important, than just the distractions of sports. And so I think it's great that we're able to use this platform in order to do good. And I really appreciate everybody who stepped up and gave to the foundation.
I'm glad you brought it up, because obviously we've all had a lot on our minds over the last week, but I don't want this to get lost. Yeah. Because there's a lot competing for your attention, and rightly so, of course. But you want to talk about a way to make a positive contribution to the Michigan State community and far, far beyond it. This is a really, really good way to do that.
Yeah. It's an excellent opportunity to show your support for Mady, obviously, and for what he's doing with his NIL money and supporting his home back in Mali, but also to, really positively impact these kids and to show them that, the world is a big place, and there are all kinds of people there who are looking to do the right thing as well. And so I think that's always an important gesture from us. And again, it's been a blessing to be part of the show and to have the opportunity to have this platform in order to push these things that I think are really important. And so if you have not listened to that interview, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to it on February 9th. You can watch it on YouTube if you want, if you'd rather watch than listen, at our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@TFFINOTS, or you can certainly just go to MadySissokoFoundation.org, and actually our video is actually on the front page now, so you can actually watch the interview right there too, and then give money to support the venture. But let's talk a little bit basketball now. Michigan State is facing Indiana for the second time. Indiana is 19-8. They're 10-6 in the Big Ten. They're ranked 20th overall in KenPom. They've won 9 of their last 11 games after a really shaky start to the Big Ten season. They just won a close game against Illinois at home on Saturday, in which Illinois was out with one of the best players out, Terrence Shannon. Indiana's 25th on offense, 35th on defense. And on offense this year, they're kind of back to, I would say, like traditional Indiana teams that they could shoot the ball really well from outside, where they're shooting 38% from three, which puts them 14th in the country. They're 59th in the country inside the arc, which is still very good. They do have some weaknesses. They're prone to turn the ball over at 127th. They're not a very good offensive rebounding team, which is surprising, I think. They're number 142nd. And they're 218th in getting fouled and for free throw attempts. So defense, they're very good against the twos at number 35, and a lot because of Trayce Jackson Davis and his bolstering things in the inside. And they're number 8th in block shot percentage. They don't foul a whole lot, so that helps also with their defense efficiency. They do give up a lot of three-point attempts. So they're 200th in for three-point attempts. And you definitely saw that against Illinois on Saturday as well. And they don't do a lot of generating turnovers, but they're okay, not great in defensive rebounding.
You know, when Xavier Johnson got hurt, I don't know that I said it here. I may have posted it on the Spartan Mag board, but one or the other, I made a comment about how, you know, maybe this is what it will take to correct the course, because they were at 1-4 in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And but I also, in fairness, I also said it could happen that, you know, it's addition by subtraction, but I doubt it. And the reason I doubted it is I hadn't seen a lot from their freshman guard, Hood Schifino, to believe that he would be capable of really elevating them. Well, you can call it a coincidence, but I don't think it is. In fact, they did take off after Johnson went out of the lineup. And I don't think it's all down to that, because Trayce Jackson Davis has been, particularly over the last 3 weeks or so, has just played like a man possessed. I mean, he really, you watch it, and it happened in the first MSU game, which was early in this streak out of 9 of 11. I think they'd won 2 games to get to 3-4 in the league prior to the MSU game.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw it in that MSU game. I mean, he played with as much force and intensity as I'd ever seen from him. And he's largely continued that. So that's a big, big factor too. But it also has to be said that they've gotten better since Johnson went out of the lineup. Looking at the totality of it, I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think it's an accident. It's made them better. I think, well, a couple things, I think. One, there still seems to be a feeling that Johnson's going to get back before the end of the season. If I were Mike Woodson, I'd be very, very concerned about how I handle that. Because I think if you force it, you could end up with a situation like Illinois found themselves in last year with Andre Curbelo very easily. And Johnson's not that bad, but he's, in my opinion, he's not a winning player. He's I've said this before here, he is to me the epitome of an empty stats guy. His stats look fine for the most part, but when I've watched him play over the course of his time at Indiana, what I've seen is a guy who, when big moments arise and you need a guard to make a mature play, he comes up short consistently. And because he's a ball dominant player, I don't know how you insert him and say, okay, you're back X, but we figured some things out in your absence, so you're going to have to slot in. That's a tough trick to turn.
Sure.
You know, and you look at Michigan State history, they were able to pull it off with Nick Ward in 2019, to, I think, a lot of people's surprise. I think it was questionable when Nick came back. Will he accept no longer being the starter, no longer being the main guy, because Xavier Tillman had really asserted himself in his absence. And to his credit, Nick did that. He blended in. He was willing to play a somewhat reduced role, and it worked. This is different because Xavier Johnson's a guy who's used to having the ball in his hands. If Indiana tries to reinsert him and hand him the ball and say, okay, here's the keys back, they're done. I mean, that would be a disaster. If they instead try to say, look, we're going to fit you in, but it's going to be a different role for you, then I think it remains to be seen how that works out. Maybe it will. Maybe he's willing to not rock the boat and come. Illinois, they basically handed the keys back to Curbelo and they suffered for it, in my view. Mm-hmm. That was an example of how it goes wrong. So I think that's one thing to watch for with Indiana down the stretch. Right now, it looks pretty good. Can it stay that way? The second thing is, you mentioned that game yesterday against Illinois. I watched it as well. It was a fascinating game, very competitive, well played. Indiana managed to win, but they look like a team to me in that game that's just starting to teeter on the brink of their schedule and the intensity they've played with and all of that starting to impact them. They look tired. Now at home, it's one thing because you can rely on a crowd to get you over the hump. And I think that's what they did. But they made mistakes down the stretch of that game that were uncharacteristic. And they're the kind of things that, in my opinion, a team makes when it's tired. And I don't even just mean physically, I mean mentally too. Every team hits these periods where, we talked about it with Michigan State last night, right?
Right.
Those last few minutes of the game, I think part, not all, but part of what went on with Michigan State not being able to rebound, not being able to defend the way that they needed to down the stretch, they looked to me like a team that was a little bit out of gas. Mentally, emotionally, psychologically, is much more so than physically. And Indiana, to me, looked like a team in that Illinois game, even though they won, that I can kind of see it coming. So I'm going to be interested to see how they look on Tuesday night from that perspective as well. But they were the preseason favorite. It's unlikely. You can't say it's definitely off the table, but I think it's unlikely that they win the Big Ten this year. There's still a couple games back in the loss column and they're running out of time. They do get another shot at Purdue, which helps, but it's in West Lafayette. So you don't put a lot of faith in winning there. And a loss in that game would about do it. So you could say, well, they've fallen short of expectations, but as we talked about in the preseason, I was very skeptical of Indiana. And right now, where they are right now, they are better than I expected them to be.
Yeah.
They're more coherent. They're not a juggernaut, but they have a truly great player who is playing great. Two different things sometimes. And their other guys have blended in well enough to make them very competitive. And look, Indiana, to their credit, has had to overcome injury problems themselves.
Sure.
It's not just Xavier Johnson. They've had Trayce Thompson banged up a lot this year. They've had other guys. Even Trayce Jackson Davis was hurt at an earlier stage of the season. So they've had to overcome some of that stuff too. So I've been very skeptical of Mike Woodson and that program, I think with justification, but at least to date, you have to give them credit for putting together a nice season. Where it goes from here will ultimately determine how it's remembered. But to date, they've had a nice year.
Yeah, and to your point about Xavier Johnson coming back, you see this all the time, right? You have players, not only is he coming back from injury and have to reinsert as a team has evolved and changed, as you mentioned, it's a different team than it was when he left, but also, what's your conditioning like? I mean, expectation you're not going to be playing as many minutes as you were to start with, even if you, even if they were okay with you playing all those minutes. So there's a lot of transition for him to do that.
Well, that might help actually in terms of smoothing the path. If everybody buys into that fact that, look, you're just not physically ready to play the same kind of role that you were before, that might actually be a positive. But again, it all depends on how the head coach views that player and his team and his role within it when he comes back. And as we've talked about here, there are examples in both directions of where it's been handled in a way and worked out positively. And then other examples where I think it really played poorly. And we just don't know because we haven't seen it yet. We don't know how Indiana will handle it. This all assumes that the speculation is correct and Johnson does in fact come back.
Right. Yeah, sure.
I mean, we have to allow for that maybe for whatever reason, it just doesn't happen. But it seems like from everything I read, it seems like there's still an expectation. Hey, we're going to get him back before the end of the season.
Yeah. And Indiana as a team seems like every team is better at home than on the road. Virtually every team. They seem more so than most teams. Like they seem to be a very, very different team at home versus on the road. On the road, they tend to struggle a lot more. At least I even remember watching the Minnesota game, and they beat Minnesota, but it wasn't like they beat them by a lot. And they really struggled to handle Minnesota in Minneapolis. So I don't know.
I'll give you one stat, which we'll return to when we get to the keys that makes it very clear. So they're shooting 38% as a team on the year from three. That's a very good number. It's top 15 in the country. It's a little better than MSU. They shoot 33.5% from three on the road.
Mm-hmm.
So to get to 38% overall, they're shooting really well at Assembly Hall, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
like
you just do the math.
Yeah, right.
Right. But that tells you, okay, and again, that's not a knock on them. That's kind of what you would expect. But they struggle on the road. Some of their individual players, Bates, for example, who just killed MSU at Assembly Hall, he has been largely really, really effective at home. He has struggled mightily on the road. I watched their game against Michigan the other night where they managed to beat Michigan by 1. Bates was pretty bad at Chrysler, and they've got some other guys who fall into that category too. What's helped them is the one guy who doesn't seem to be too affected by it is their best player, Trayce Jackson Davis. And when you've got a guy like that who is as engaged as he is right now, that gives you a chance in any game. But yeah, there's no question they are a different team, much more so than say a Purdue has been, or even a Northwestern. I think Northwestern, I largely believe it doesn't matter where they play.
Yeah, they're 5 wins on the road in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and they've lost some at home too. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter for them, but for Indiana, it matters.
Yeah, so I guess why don't we go through the starters? And the starters are brought to us by Brothers That Just Do Gutters. If you have gutter problems, maybe you need them cleaned out, you've got a tree growing it like me, maybe you just need them new gutters installed, maybe just repairs, you've got big, huge puddles sitting by your house because the downspouts aren't operating properly, or you have it running off the roof onto your garden and making you unable to garden, which was also one of my problems. Talk to Kurt Stauffer and his team over at Brothers That Just Do Gutters. They are located on the west side of the state. They are in the Grand Rapids area, but a large region. They go all the way from Lakeshore up to Rockford, out to Lowell, down to Saugatuck. So if you're in that area and you need gutter work, call Kurt Stauffer. You can contact him at kurt.stauffer@brothersgutters.com. That link will be on our show notes. You can also remind him, say Final Four, and he'll get you 10% off your quote, and he'll take care of you. The guys do a great job. They work in any weather. They did mine just a couple weeks ago while it was like raining and 40 degrees. It's a miserable job. I'm so impressed they get the job done, but I'm so happy to have it done now. So the starters for Indiana, we'll start with Jalen Hood-Schifino, we talked about earlier, 6'7" freshman point guard, averaging 12.6 points a game on 42, 39, and 73 shooting. He's also averaging a little under 4 rebounds a game and leads the team with assists with 95, but quite a few turnovers, as you'd expect with the freshman with 68. He's a guy who can score a lot. He's a potential one and done, or there's certainly talk of that, and probably depends on how he finishes up the season here. So I don't know. He's a problem, obviously.
When he's on, he's an extremely difficult cover because he's 6'7", he's reasonably good athletically, and he's skilled. I mean, you look at those shooting numbers, it tells you this is a guy who can make shots. He has definitely been, as we talked about, the team has been better with him as the primary on-ball guy. I felt when Xavier Johnson was still in the lineup, he wasn't, Hood Schifino was not as good because for whatever reason, but it's blossomed, it's changed a bit for him since he's become the primary guy. That said, he has, for all his talent, and it's considerable, he is a freshman guard. And when you look at his performances, it's in line with that. He has had real trouble maintaining consistency from game to game. And if you look at his game by game numbers, you will see that it's almost a one on, one off kind of thing. And when I say off, I don't necessarily mean, well, he scores 20 one night and 0 the next. What I mean is he'll have a game where he's extremely efficient, makes the majority of his shots, doesn't make a lot of mistakes with the ball, with turnovers, and generally is really, really impactful. And then he'll follow that up either with a game where he doesn't make a big impact or just one where he's really inefficient. Like the Illinois game yesterday, he had 13 points, but he really struggled with efficiency. And I thought he made some bad choices. His shot selection was questionable in that game, in my view. He took a lot of contested shots, which tends to be a weakness for him. And that's what happens with a young player with a lot of talent. Sometimes they need time to make the adjustment into understanding, okay, I'm a good player, I'm confident in my ability, but I need to be more selective about what I try to do. That's usually a bridge that very talented young players have to cross, is that they've got to figure out what makes sense in a given moment, right? And I don't feel he's managed to do that consistently just yet. So very good player. Honestly, if the pattern holds up, it would be a reasonable expectation for him to be efficient against MSU, since he really wasn't against Illinois. But then again, he's on the road, so we'll see. But a very talented guy, no question about that.
Yeah, and I would point out the last two games that Indiana's played, Michigan and then Illinois, they've really struggled to get into their offense at the end of the game. I mean, they ended up winning Michigan, and then the game before that is actually Northwestern, and they also had trouble there where they didn't, they eventually just kind of ran out of gas and stopped scoring. So I feel like that is probably a reflection of the point guard, right? I mean, when Michigan State's offense sputters, it's AJ not quite getting things or reading things properly.
And here's the thing. I would argue Indiana is in an even worse spot than Michigan State, because with Michigan State, at least, if AJ is struggling, there's at least hope that Tyson Walker can shoulder some of the burden. Right. Indiana doesn't have a Tyson Walker equivalent. It's really Hood Schifino or bust. I mean, some of their other guys, Galloway, Galloway is a nice overall player, but he's not a dynamic enough guy to really make a lot happen in that way. So it really has to be Hood Schifino.
Well, especially you're at a disadvantage if your best player is a post player and you have a point guard who has trouble getting the ball. I mean, right. I mean, that's because he doesn't start with the ball. And so you've got to make sure you get it into him, and to have someone who's, struggling.
What's interesting about that, because I was thinking this watching the Illinois game down the stretch, especially in previous years, I've felt that one of the biggest indictments of Indiana's guard play, and it's across multiple guys, it's not just one group, has been their inability or refusal, take your pick, to get the ball enough to Trayce Jackson Davis. There were games where it would absolutely blow my mind that he would take 9 shots, 10 shots from the floor. It was crazy.
Yeah.
When you have a weapon like that, because look, he's the best he's ever been this year, but he's been good for the moment he got on campus.
Yeah.
He was a highly regarded recruit. I saw him play AAU when Michigan State was recruiting him. It was obvious. His career has been no surprise. It was obvious he was going to be a guy that was impactful from the moment he stepped on campus, and he was. But in his previous 3 seasons, I didn't feel Indiana did nearly a good enough job getting him the ball. This year, one change that I've noticed, and you saw it in that Illinois game, relatively frequently, Trayce will grab a rebound and he's bringing the ball up himself.
Yeah, right.
Or he goes way out on the perimeter to go get it. He's not just satisfied with just staying rooted to the blocks and waiting for them to get him the ball. If he's not getting the ball, he goes and gets it. And then because he's got a good handle for a big man, he generally is able to work himself into scoring position from there if he needs to. So that's been a difference in his mindset. I think that he's realized, hey, if these guys aren't going to get me the ball, I've got to go get it. And he does that. Or I've got the ball now, I'm keeping it.
Yeah.
You know, that might sound selfish, but it's not. He's their best option, because if he's got the ball, that forces defenses to distort, and he's a very good passer and he makes plays for others. So it's smart for him to have the ball as much as possible. Not just about him scoring, but it's about creating good opportunities for Indiana overall.
Yeah, and you don't certainly get the impression that he's unpopular with his team, or that that he's like, hogging the ball or something like that.
No, not at all.
Well, let's talk next players. Trey Galloway, 6'5" junior. He's been starting lately. And as you mentioned, he provides those intangibles. He's a hustle guy for sure. He goes about 1,000,000 miles an hour out in the court. He averages a little over 7 points a game on 53, 50, and 69 shooting, which is better than the past. He's a 2-to-1 assist. Yeah, right. 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. But in some ways, he moves so fast that I think he just going too fast and a little out of control all the time. And that's probably what you were alluding to a little bit, in that as far as from a point guard standpoint, he's probably not the type of person you want to be the main facilitator on the offense.
No, he's not a point guard, and that's not a knock. He's finally, this year, his third year, he has emerged as a guy I would view as a very valuable player. Any good team needs guys like Trey Galloway. I would compare him not in terms of his overall production or necessarily even style of play, but just in terms of the role he fills for this team. He's kind of akin to like what a guy like Matt McQuaid was when he was a senior for Michigan State. Now, what made the difference with Matt was toward the end of that year, when they got in the postseason, Matt had some big offensive performances that I don't know that we'll see from Trey Galloway. Right. But I just mean, when you look at everything he gives you, it does remind me of that a little bit. He plays very, very hard. He generally makes good decisions. He's become a reliable shooter, not a high volume guy, but when he gets shot, I mean, 50% is 50% from three. That's a guy you're comfortable with. And you're comfortable not just with the percentage, but what that also tells me is Trey Galloway, as opposed to maybe somebody like Hood Schifino, I believe Trey Galloway knows what a good shot is for him. Mm-hmm. And so his shot selection is really good. And, you're right that you run into some problems at times because he plays like his hair is on fire, but he also does things positively for them as a result too. So he's a role player who I think has become a very valuable guy for them. And every good team needs guys who do the kinds of things that he does. So kudos to him, because, man, his first 2 years, I got to tell you, I was not convinced, and I was paying particular attention because he was a guy Michigan State recruited. Michigan State offered him, they were in that recruitment. And the first 2 years he had, I was of the opinion, well, that was a blessing in disguise that he didn't get this guy, because he just, to me, I questioned whether he was, you never questioned the effort, but I just questioned, is he ever going to be an efficient enough player offensively to warrant playing a big role? Or is he going to continually be a 10-minute a night guy that you eject once a half for energy and a little bit of defense? And this year he's had the breakthrough. So good for him.
Yeah, I feel like at the Big Ten tournament last season, that he was the difference in getting Indiana as far as it did, because he just brought that energy, and he scored a little bit, but he just made every play in defense and rebounding and scrapping for balls, and he's what got him back in that game against Michigan, and then propelled them all the way to as far as they went.
That's a good point, and that was, I think, where the breakthrough started to happen, as I recall, was late in the year. It seemed like he started to figure some things out, and obviously it's just continued and gone on from there.
Next would be Miller Kopp, the former Northwestern Wildcat, 6'7" super senior wing, averaging 7.9 points a game on 49, 45, and 83 shooting. 2/3 of his attempts come from three, and he's not a great defender. He had a couple of good defensive plays, actually, which surprised me last against Illinois at the end of the game. But I don't know, he's a guy who is definitely much better than he was last year. Last year on the Indiana team, he was largely ineffective. So good for him, I guess, to get better.
Yeah, he had kind of a rough game at Northwestern, and that crowd really gave it to him. And I've seen there's been some talk about that. He was upset by it. Look, when you transfer to another team in your conference,
what do you expect?
I don't know what else you expect, but it did sound like some of it maybe crossed the line. I can't really even comment too strongly on it because I wasn't there. I'm not sure exactly, but that seemed to be the suggestion from him and from some of the IU folks. But he was really good against Illinois. And as you say, his shot has returned, which is a big deal for Indiana. He's part of that vastly improved shooting. Despite the couple of plays he made defensively against Illinois, though, let's call a spade a spade. He's not a great defensive player. Right. And that's where the weakness has been. If you're Michigan State, I think he's a guy you come into this game looking to take advantage of. But at the other end, he's a guy you really have to be conscious of when he's on the arc. I mean, 2/3 of his shots come from three, so that's what he's going to do. And if he's not hitting from out there, he's not really going to contribute very much offensively. He's pretty much a one-trick pony, but it's a good trick.
Yeah, it's a good trick. And he does occasionally drive, and enough to cause problems that you can't just guard him at the 3-point line. And by driving, he often just drives and kicks usually. But next is Trayce Thompson. Did Trayce play in the first game against Michigan State? Is that the first game he came back for a few minutes or something?
I think.
But he was very ineffective, if I recall.
Yes. If I remember correctly, we didn't expect him to, and he did, but he didn't do a lot.
So he's back in from injury, obviously. He is 6'6" senior, averaging 7.8 points a game, 47, 24, and 76 shooting, along with 5 rebounds a game. And he has, at least when I've watched him since he's been back, he is not the same player. He used to be a really great compliment to TJD.
Oh yeah,
they were fearsome 1-2. He seems much less than he was before the injury, and I guess I don't know what the injury was outside of it was just a knee injury of some sort. So I don't know. I mean, I think he's a guy you would certainly have been more worried about 2 months ago than you are now.
I in some ways, I look at him as a similar situation to Malik Hall in that it's somewhat unfair to judge him too harshly on the season he's had because it's been so messed up by his injury problems. I don't disagree with you. He's not as good as he's been. I mean, I believe he's been a double-digit scorer in the past.
Yeah, he was really good. Yeah.
And he's not now. I think one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons they haven't been as good an offensive rebounding team as you might have expected has been him either not being in the lineup or when he is in the lineup, not being the same guy. Because he's another one of these guys that in the past has played with a really good motor. I mean, Trayce Thompson generally is a guy you come away from watching thinking, well, that kid plays hard. Hasn't been very effective with the jumper. Again, he's just, everything is down for understandable reasons, but even this Trayce Thompson, they'd much rather have than not because he lengthens their bench and gives them a guy who's experienced. And even if he's not clicking as well as he has in the past, he's still got so much experience playing with TJD that, you'd rather have him available than not, clearly.
Absolutely. Yeah, they don't have a super deep bench, so it's obviously
Right.
helpful to have him out there. And so finally, Trayce Jackson Davis, 6'9" senior. He's averaging 20.3 points a game, 57% from the floor, 70% from the line. Also, almost over 11 rebounds a game and 3 blocks a game. He is, I think he's making a run and making an argument for Big Ten Player of the Year. I think he's probably between him and Zach Edey. And you wonder if they're going to have a matchup again at Mackey now. If he keeps his pace, you wonder if that changed the narrative a little bit of the most dominant player in the Big Ten, because he just more dynamic. He definitely looks like a player who's not done playing in college, right? I mean, Zach Edey, you wonder sort of how he fits in the NBA. I don't think there's many questions about Trayce Jackson Davis.
He has, I looked at the numbers where they were before the first game against MSU. He's raised his scoring average and his rebounding average scoring's up by just about 2 a game. Rebounding is up by a little more than 2 per game. That's hard to do.
That's amazing in 3 weeks.
At this stage of the season, that's really hard to do. It tells you something about the level he's played at. I'm with you in terms of your assessment of how he's played. I said this on Jack Ebling's show. It was yesterday or Friday. We're recording on Sunday, so a couple days ago. He, to me, has looked like a guy, and sometimes you don't always see it, but there are times you see it with certain players. Matt McQuaid would be a good example, actually, to call back to that. Sometimes you see late in the season a light go on for a senior where it becomes obvious he's realized, hey, I'm running out of time. Yeah. I've only got so many games left. If I want to leave a legacy, make my mark, it's now or never. And that is how Trayce Jackson Davis has looked to me. He has looked like a guy that decided at a certain point, I want to get everything I can out of this. And boy, he has done that. It is remarkable to even be considering the possibility that somebody other than Zach Edey might win Big Ten Player of the Year. But I think you're right. I still would make Zach Edey the favorite. But if Trayce Jackson Davis can somehow go into West Lafayette and Indiana were to win that game and he were to play extremely well, that might be enough to wedge open a possibility. I still think Edey's your favorite over the course of the season. He merits that. But for about the last 3 weeks or so, TJD's been the best player in the Big Ten. And I don't think it's particularly close either during that time. I think he's clearly been the best player in the Big Ten. Because you mentioned something else too, and it gets to what I was talking about a few minutes ago as well. The difference in the two of them, Zach Edey is a guy who, just because he has freakish physical tools, and I don't mean to denigrate him as a player.
No, just he's crazy tall and big.
He's 7'4" and big and skilled enough to use that size positively. That's what he does. Trayce Jackson Davis is an entirely different thing. He's a guy who can go 94 feet. He can grab a rebound, take the ball down himself, be his own outlet pass, and finish, right? He is an extremely effective rim protector, more so than Edey. He has become a relentless rebounder over this stretch. I mean, just if there's an opportunity and he's in the vicinity, you're putting your money on him coming up with the ball. That's just how it is right now. Yep. He is an outstanding, Edey's a good passer. I would say Trayce is a better passer, a very good passer. The only thing he doesn't do, and it's something Edey doesn't do either, the only thing Trayce doesn't do is he doesn't shoot the ball from range, but who cares? At the level he's played at, that's the last thing in the world you're concerned about. So I think he is more versatile, more dynamic, certainly, than Edey in terms of all the different ways in which he impacts the game. So yeah, I mean, he's a load. there's no other way to put it. And good for him, because as much as I was disappointed that he picked Indiana, and I had even heard some things last year and the year before, frankly, when they fired Archie Miller, that made me think Michigan State might get another shot at him. That wasn't wild speculation. But when a guy sticks with the program and is rewarded for it, and in large part, in his case, due to his own efforts, it wasn't just that everything worked out around him. He's had a huge role in making it work. You have to feel good for him. I mean, he's done it the right way, no criticism.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the reserves then. We'll start with Jordan Geronimo, 6'6" junior, averaging 5.1 points a game on 56, 26, and 62 shooting, along with a little under 3 rebounds a game in 14 minutes, and also averaging a block per game. I think he was starting the last game, and that Thompson came back, he's now back into reserve status. But he'll play a lot of minutes because of that.
He'll be at least a 15-minute a night guy. He's good enough that he can make occasional contributions. I have to be honest, when I saw him as a freshman, I thought he would be further along than he is. To me, he looked, Indiana had this run of producing these guys. Oladipo was one.
Right.
OG Anunoby was another. These kind of mid-size 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" guys that are strong, very athletic, and over their time there, you see them gradually develop their games, become more consistent shooters, start proving capable of doing more things at a high level. I thought this guy had a chance to be another one of those types of players. And he's effective. He's a decent, solid role player. So that's not a knock on him. It's just, I thought he might have a chance to be better. So far, it hasn't happened.
Next would be Tamar Bates, 6'4" sophomore wing, averaging 7 points a game on 43, 41, and 96 shooting, while averaging 21 minutes a game. He was just tore us apart pieces along with many players at Assembly Hall, but he was one we hadn't expected to do as well as he did, and he killed us from deep.
Yeah, we talked about the variance with this team, home and away, and as an individual player, he's the most stark example of that in my view. At home, as we saw in the first game, he is a terror. On the road, it's a different story. I mean, their game at Chrysler, he was invisible.
Yeah, it's strange you have players that are that different. I guess I can sort of see it from someone who shoots maybe, but I feel like I'm surprised that maybe it's because he's young. I suppose he's just a sophomore.
Actually, yeah, he's just a sophomore, and you would hope that over time he'll find a little more consistent level of play. But for now, he's largely been a feast or famine type guy, depending upon the venue he's playing in.
Right. Well, finally, it's Malik Renault, a 6'9", 230-pound freshman, playing the 4 and the 5, averaging 6.7 points a game on 57, 25, and 69 shooting. Also 3.7 rebounds a game in about 15 minutes. I really like him. I think he provides him for a freshman. He provides him with some really good minutes.
Yeah, look, they needed it, and it's something they haven't had for the last couple of years, which, you look at those numbers and they don't leap out at you, but trust me, the quality of play they are getting from him is very different than what they've gotten behind their post players in the couple years prior. He's got a lot of potential, and I would assume he comes back. He was a highly rated recruit. He was a McDonald's All-American, if I remember correctly. But it's hard to imagine him making the choice to go pro. So I would think that they look at him as, all right, this is our guy who next year steps into the role that TJD has been in as our primary post player. And I think he's shown the potential to be capable of stepping into that and being very good. So I'm with you there. The criticism, and it's not really a criticism, it's just a statement of how things are. He's a freshman, and he makes freshman mistakes. So you're not going to get a clean game out of him, but you get good effort, evidence of some real talent, and occasional production.
All right, we'll go to our Keys of the Game brought to you by Nudge Printing. You can visit them at nudgeprinting.com, and we'll be back in just a moment.
The NBA season is underway, and it's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in free bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel has all your favorite bets, from the money line to point spreads to player props. You can even combine your bets for a chance at an even bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Plus, with live betting, you'll get updated odds on games that have already started. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. So download FanDuel today using promo code BLUEWIRE to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Make every moment more this season with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. 21 or older and present in New Jersey. First online real money wager only. Refund issued as non-withdrawable free bets that expires in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
What's up, everyone? I'm Sean, Second the Money Kramer.
And I'm Ryan, Real Money Kramer.
And since 2011, we've hosted the Sports Gambling Podcast, where we're breaking down our favorite betting picks for college basketball, NFL, NBA, college football, golf.
If you can bet on it, we're picking it.
And don't worry, we're not some touts trying to get you to buy our picks. Everything we put out is free.
We don't sell picks, we make them.
Check us out on Amazon Music. And don't forget to let it ride.
All right. So we're back with the 5 Keys of the Game brought to you by Nudge Printing. I'd encourage you, Gabe, Brittany are MSU alums, and so visit their website at nudgeprinting.com. You can get great Spartan apparel. They're also teaming up with a lot of other companies to help with the Spartan Strong, raising funds for the survivors of the terrible tragedy that happened on Monday on the 13th. So you can go to their website and buy Spartan Strong shirts and any other thing you need to take care of all your Spartan needs, as far as decals, fat heads, cornhole decals, all kinds of things. They have vintage MSU licenses, and all their things, at least everything that I've ever purchased from there, have been really, really high quality. Very soft, comfortable shirts. They're screen printed, so they're high quality in the sense that they're not going to fade very easily, and they're very wearable. I've got a hoodie. They actually provide all the apparel for our show. So if you want to support our show, you can go to the selection, our collection, which has both a t-shirt and a hoodie with our logo for our shirts. You can find that at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/merchandise. You just click the little button at the very top of the website. That'll take you to our collection. You can buy that. And then, of course, anything else. All the proceeds from our apparel goes to our show. So it's a way of supporting our show, showing your support around town. And then everything else, you can get 20% off by typing in the coupon code Final4 at checkout. Check out their stuff. It's great, great stuff. And there's also other schools, both in the state of Michigan and then away from here, outside of University of Michigan, which is not sold by the Gabe and Brittany. So let's go on to the keys of the game. The first one, emotion. I mean, obviously, this is the first time back in the Breslin since the tragedy on Monday. There's going to be a lot of emotion, a lot of, I think they did a decent job at Michigan. They were hitting some shots. They didn't look flat. I think you worry about that sort of thing. So hopefully they had a couple more days to process things. But again, it's going to be tough, not only for them, but I think, in some respects, it's going to be tough for Indiana too. It's sort of how they're going to sort of, handle things and deal with it as well. So it'll be a great wild card, I guess, in this game.
Yeah. And I guess I'm the one who used the word emotion, but I'll broaden it to encompass a couple different things. One thing certainly is what you mentioned. I think you never know how individuals are going to react to situations like this. It's we don't have experience in this, and it's hard to know definitively how Michigan State will come out. I think Michigan State, I am very proud of the way that team played in Ann Arbor.
Me too.
I think that some of the things that happened, particularly down the stretch, were attributable to what they went through, or at least plausibly could have been. But I the idea of trying to hold somebody accountable for that, given the situation, is ludicrous to me.
Yeah.
So I'm very proud of the way that those guys conducted themselves and the effort that they showed. This will be another challenge because, as you said, it's at home, and so the vibe is going to be different, very different. And you don't know how they'll react to that. We can hope that it won't affect them negatively, and that and I'm just talking about this from purely a basketball perspective.
Yeah,
Again, I
right.
just want to reiterate. I think this idea about using basketball to I do not buy into it. So I'm strictly talking about other than in a very limited way, other than for those kids themselves to be able to focus on that and escape whatever else might be on their minds. And there is value in that for them. But that's it. That's where it stops for me. So everything I'm talking about is strictly related to looking at the basketball aspects of this. We'll hope that they're able to play well. The Indiana side, there's some different challenges. One is kind of what you were alluding to. You don't know how the other team reacts to being in the middle of that situation. That's got to be very difficult in and of itself. But there's also this factor that I mentioned earlier. Indiana looks to me like they're a little tired right now. I detected that against Illinois. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I think they did some things that I hadn't seen them doing. Let's also keep in mind, they had to go down to the wire against an Illinois team that was missing its best player.
Yeah.
In Terrence Shannon. He was in concussion protocol. He did not play. So they struggled at home to beat an Illinois team that they waxed in Champaign-Urbana and was playing without their best player. But a win's a win, but I'm just saying to me, it made me feel more confident in the idea that, yeah, they might be hitting a bit of a physical and mental lull, which would be understandable because it happens to everybody at a certain point. And, it may be that their schedule is just they're in that period where it starts to hit home and it starts to take a little bit of a toll. Trayce Jackson Davis in particular, he's played a ton of minutes and he is he's the fulcrum of everything they do. So there's a quote that I've seen tossed around a lot over the last week or so. Media have asked him about this, and his line has been, "I don't have time to be tired." Okay.
Yeah.
And I believe that he believes that.
Yeah.
And I believe that's his intention, and good for him. It demonstrates the right kind of mindset. But, sometimes your body and your mind react to that by saying, well, that's a nice thought, but, and I think it's not just him. I think it's their whole team, I think, has shown it. So it'll be interesting to me to see what shows up in that respect, if anything.
That guy is playing 33.8 minutes a game. He leads the team in time on the court. And with the sort of the way he plays, that's got to take a toll,
Yeah, because it's
banging inside and stuff. And,
that's it. It's the usage is high, so you're asking him to do a ton. So start with that. He's extremely active defensively. He's extremely active on the boards. He's expending a ton of energy there. And then there's just the general wear and tear, banging in the post in the Big Ten.
So the number 2 key to the game, the second is defensive game plan. So Michigan State, how do you defend a dynamic post player? Do you double? Do you just play straight up and make sure the shooters don't have an opportunity to kill you? Michigan State decided to, they tried to pick their poison with the strychnine and the arsenic, and they ended up taking both of them against in Assembly Hall, where Indiana shot the last out, and Jackson Davis hurt him from inside. So what do you think is going to be going on this time?
It's a good question, and it was the same question we had going into the Michigan game. And the answer that we got is that Michigan State played against Michigan largely the same way they did in their first meeting, which meant They sent people at Dickinson a lot from different areas of the court with different timing. The difference was, I think he was better in dealing with that, and Michigan's shooting was much better than it was in the first game. And so you put those things together, and I think you can say that Michigan State's defensive approach was not as effective as they would have liked it to be. I can't say it was a disaster because they actually limited Dickinson's own production pretty decently. But I don't think they limited Michigan's production as well as they would have liked to, which is really the point. With Indiana, the complicating factor, I think, is this, and I mentioned this earlier, they are a much worse jump shooting team on the road than they are at home. So when you look at that, do you put faith in those numbers and say, hey, Trayce Jackson Davis has proven he can go win a game virtually by himself. We're not doing that. We're going to force other people to beat us. And do you rely on those numbers and say, hey, they're not as good on the road as they are at home, so we'll take our chances with their guys beating us with jumpers as opposed to letting Trayce just go to work one-on-one? There's an argument for that, clearly. I think the counter is, yeah, they've been worse on the road than at home, but even that 33.5% from three isn't a disaster. It's not like they're hitting 25%. And if you're giving them wide open shots as a result of overcommitting to dealing with Jackson Davis, is that going to make it likely that they actually shoot better than that road percentage? And this is one game. It's fine to talk about a seasonal average, but you're playing one game. What happens in this game is all that you really care about. You know what I mean? So it'll be interesting. I mean, I never thought I'd live long enough to see a situation where Michigan State did as much in the way of doubling as they have this year. It has been, I think I've mentioned this before, they've done more doubling this year than I think the rest of Tom Izzo's career combined. It's a total shift in terms of how they've played it. And, that you could say that's out of necessity. There are valid arguments, I suppose, in that direction, but it is a determining factor. There have been times where I felt the way they've played it has had a lot to do with them either winning games or being competitive in games. And then there are times where it hasn't worked as well. And that's across the board. That doesn't just mean they've consistently, when they've doubled, there are games where they haven't doubled and it's either been positive or negative, in terms of the outcome. My preference is always do whatever you have to do to limit the 3-point shooting. Right. I would, given, and that's just my personal feeling about it, that I would be very hesitant to overcommit against this guy precisely because he's such an effective passer.
I was going to say he's a good passer. Yeah.
Yeah. You may keep him from scoring as much, but I don't think you're going to deny Indiana good shot opportunities. And so to me, I'm not saying don't ever send help, but I'd be very judicious about it.
Yeah, I think Michigan State struggles, especially from the defensive rebounding standpoint too. When they send the doubles, they just have, you lose contact with the guy you're supposed to box out. I was just going to read over, and this is kind of interesting. So you had mentioned earlier the difference in Indiana home versus away as far as the 3-point shooting. So this will last like 13 games. So home against Northwestern, 50%. At Penn State, 28.6%. Home against Wisconsin, 12.5%. At Illinois, 33%. Michigan State at home, 60%. At Minnesota, 28.6%. Home against Ohio State, 50%. At Maryland, 27.3%. Home against Purdue, 40%. Home against Rutgers, 41.7%. At Michigan, 33%. At Northwestern, 27%. Home against Illinois, 45.5%. So it definitely, I mean, that is a huge difference. That's like 20% difference.
Yeah.
That has got to make it challenging for the coaches to have to think, do you trust that enough that you can keep that going? the same thing, you know, when they come into Breslin Center.
And if you say, all right, our conclusion is we can get away with sending a lot of help at TJD and making those guys beat us, if that's what you conclude, then you have to look at, and they, of course, I'm not saying anything they don't realize 100 times more than I do, but they are going to look at it and say, all right, percentages are what they are, but what do those percentages actually mean?
Mhm.
Were those opponents kind of playing them straight up and not letting Indiana get a lot of clean looks as a result of extra help? That's what really matters, is what is Indiana going to do? What are they likely to do if you're giving them clean looks? And I don't think there's a good way to answer that. I think you look at the numbers, and it certainly suggests that they will not be the same caliber shooting. What did you say? They shot 60% from three in the game at Assembly
That was
Hall?
their best shoot. That was their best shooting day.
Yeah.
9 for 15.
Yeah.
Of
So
course.
thank God they didn't get more up. But what that tells you is that in that first game, the one thing it says to me is that Michigan State did an better than adequate job, actually, of limiting attempts. Thank God, because it would have been even worse had they, 15 attempts is not a ton.
It's a lot for Indiana, though. I mean, looking down, listen,
Yeah.
they had 20 against Ohio State, where they shot 50%, 15 against Michigan State, and then it wasn't since they played Northwestern back in January 8th they shot more than that. They shot 18, and then at Iowa they had 15. They're not a huge volume three-point shooting team in general, because of TJD, obviously, right? And so that's
part of it. It's part of it, and also, I think some of their guys, like Hood Chafino is an example, and I haven't looked at his shot chart, but just anecdotally watching him play, he takes a lot of long twos. So they don't hunt the three as much as some other teams. I think that's fair to say. But regardless, I don't think you want a game where Indiana is able to take, 25 threes.
No, probably not. And if you're getting threes, you have to make sure they're contested, right? I mean, I think that's that's obvious, right?
That's the hard thing to do.
Yeah.
When you're sending a lot of aggressive help in the post, again, I point to last night's game. It's not that Michigan scorched the nets, but I didn't think Michigan State always was able to rotate or recover at the levels that you would normally see. And there are reasons for that, but part of it is when you're sending guys as aggressively as they were, well, it's going to be a hard task.
The third key to the game, defensive rebounding. Generally been pretty good for Michigan State. Terrible against Michigan, with Michigan almost a 50% offensive rebounding percentage. And it wasn't good in Assembly Hall either. So, that has to be cleaned up and better. And, again, I think that's somewhat reflected in the fact that they were doubling a lot, and that sort of left them out of position and for offensive rebounds.
Right. But you just can't afford it. I mean, you saw if there was one decisive factor in the loss against Michigan, it was that, right? I mean, that's screamingly obvious to everybody. It's the inability to end possessions with one missed shot. Indiana is a better opponent than Michigan. They are more capable offensively than Michigan. So if you're going to continue to give a team like that multiple chances, say goodnight.
The fourth key to the game, threes. We talk about this every game. Michigan State, it's important for them offensively, just in order to score points. Although they got quite a few buckets in the paint against Michigan, more production than usual. They definitely need the threes, though, to keep pace with Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a simple fact that the three is a big part of Michigan State's offense, as we say, game after game after game. And if they're not productive, it's hard for them to score enough. Even as good as their defense has been this year, you still have to score some points. And they don't get easy baskets in transition. They don't get consistent play in the post. They don't consistently get baskets all that often in other ways in the paint, via drop-offs, penetration, what have you. They did against Michigan, especially in the first half, but that's not a consistent feature of what MSU does. So they are what they are. They're a jump shooting team.
Yeah.
And a lot of those have to be from three, and they have to be dialed in and be reasonably efficient.
And the final fifth key to the game, the guards. Michigan State has a veteran backcourt and Hogard, Walker, and obviously Indiana has Hood Schifino as a freshman and Galloway, who's been just barely playing in that starting role as a junior.
And I've been pretty complimentary, I think, in our discussion of Indiana, and it's merited in my view. But I have been of the belief all year long, and this was true even before Xavier Johnson got hurt. In fact, I would believe it even more strongly if he were playing right now, but I'm still pretty solid on this. I think their guard play is the limiter on what they can reasonably be expected to do in March. So if you're looking for a team to make a long run, they're not the one I'd put my money on, even though they've got such a great individual player in TJD, and they've got a lot of other guys who have been effective. I just feel that the lack of consistency from their guards is what's going to make it difficult for them to win, say, 2, 3, 4 games in a row in the tournament. I don't think you can do that unless you've got really high caliber guard play that shows up night in, night out. And I don't think that's what we've seen from Indiana this year. So this team going on the road, if I were an Indiana fan, I would not have a high degree of confidence. Doesn't mean they can't, but I would not have a high degree of confidence that we're going to see a great game from their guards. On the Michigan State side of the equation, their guards have to be good. Have to. I mean, obviously, Michigan State is getting a great season out of Joey Hauser. I think Malik Hall had his best game since he's come back from the second injury in the loss to Michigan. I think he was, we saw his offensive game break through to some degree.
Yeah.
In a way that it hadn't. I think in his other areas, he'd been back as a defender and a rebounder, but that was good to see him break through offensively. So it's not that Michigan State can't get production from anywhere else. They're not Northwestern, but their guards have to be good to win a game like this. Have to be.
So Michigan State is a 2-point favorite via KenPom. I don't think with Michigan State, what are they KenPom ranking, like 30-ish or so?
They were 35th going into yesterday. So
yeah, so less than that. So I don't think they'd be a quad one.
I'm sorry, that was their net ranking. I'm not sure where they.
So they would be obviously a quad one win for Indiana if they were to beat Michigan State. And Indiana.
Oh, be big.
Yeah.
Be a big win for Indiana. Road win against a quad one opponent would matter a lot.
Be huge.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not a game that, like many of these games, are not like, it's not a must win for Michigan State in order to make the tournament. But this is one that I think you feel like you have a reasonable chance of getting, and one that you should be competitive in. Of course, all the other things that are swirling around on the outside should put things more in doubt, I think, than probably you ordinarily would feel.
Yes.
The one other question I had about this game is, we saw Jackson Kohler played pretty well in Assembly Hall. He was one of the few, surprising bright spots, I guess, in that game, where he had a couple moves where he scored on Trayce Jackson Davis. And do you see him getting a little bit more outsized role in this game as well? Like they try a little turn with him to see if they can get some offense out of him?
I don't know about outsized role as much as I just think in recent games, both he and Carson Cooper have been playing more. And that's in his case, I think that's because, give him credit. And I'm not pretending he's Antonio Smith, but Jackson Kohler has been better defensively. To my eyes, he has shown improvement. I think he's been much better as a pick and roll defender. He's been respectable in the post. I mean, when I think back to the minutes he played against Michigan, they're pretty solid.
Yeah, there weren't a lot, but they were effective, right? He had 8 minutes.
Yeah, they were pretty solid. And the same can be said for Carson Cooper. Both of those guys, what they've also shown lately is, and this is something that you either have a sense for it or you don't. And look, I I'm a big fan of Mady Sissoko. I think he's gotten undeserved, and this is the pattern with Michigan State. It's a pattern with every fan base. There is always a guy or two who's going to become a lightning rod. On this team, it's largely been Mady Sissoko. But I think an advantage that both Jackson and Carson have over him is I think they have a better knack for moving into space on offense, making themselves available. Both of those guys did that last night against Michigan.
Yes.
They made themselves available. It was always what used to drive me crazy. People used to criticize Thomas Kithier going back a few years. Thomas Kithier had a great knack for that. Mm-hmm. Just being able to sense an opportunity, to sense that there's space available, getting yourself there and presenting yourself for a teammate to be able to find you for an easy basket. I think some people think that's obvious. It's not at all.
Watching that game last night, there was unquestionably, you watch Sissoko and you can just tell he doesn't have that feel for when he slips into make himself available. And you're like, oh, if he just moved at that time and he's not, and it's not even, I think in some respects is that he doesn't have a feel for it. I think part of it too is he's not looking to do it. Like, he's got his tasks that he's doing and that is not one of them that he's sort of focusing on, because it takes everything to get to where he is today is light years from where he was last season. I mean, I think it's easy for us to forget, how far he's come, and there's just more that needs to be unlocked, obviously. And I think he can, but it's probably just not going to happen, this year.
It may be something that, it's been noted many times, the lack of experience he has relative to most guys who are in their third year in a college basketball program. It may be something that does get better, but it's also one of those, there are certain traits in a basketball player that I am of the belief are kind of innate as opposed to being taught. He can be better, but with Jackson Kohler in particular, you can tell by watching Jackson Kohler, he is a kid who has been a scorer, an offensive player his whole life, because he moves like that. He plays like that. He senses things the way an offensive player does. And it's just sometimes it's either you have it or you don't. So to come back to your question, I would expect both of those guys to play a fair amount in this game because they're playing well right now. They're giving Michigan State positive production. Carson Cooper played a pretty good game against Michigan. I mean, people will focus on the outlet pass he threw away, but he did far more positive than negative in that game. Same for Jackson Kohler in the minutes he played. So I think right now we are getting to a point where it is more of a three-headed combination there, rather than Mady plays 25 and the other two guys split the remainder. Mady will still play the majority of minutes, and for good reason. He's still, I think by a decent margin, their best defensive option. I still think he's their best rebounder among those three, last night notwithstanding. But the other guys are getting better, the way you would hope that freshmen would down the back stretch of their first season. I think both those guys have shown improvement, and I would expect their playing time to reflect that.
And we didn't talk about this last night, but it recently occurred to me that, there's that one play where Hoggard threw the ball down the lane, and I think he was expecting, I think it was Kohler.
It was Kohler
to come in, move into that, to cut towards the basket more. But what I was so surprised by is that Hoggard didn't go crazy like he has in the past, like a few weeks ago, where he's like just yelling and screaming and stuff. And he's much more muted. And it makes me more hopeful that he's sort of, embracing that leadership, and he's going to, maybe that he's turned the corner there. I know it's just one instance, but my hope is that that's a sign of things to come.
Maybe. And that, as was pointed out by Jim Jackson on the broadcast, that one was on Jackson. I've spent the last few minutes talking about how instinctual he is as a player. And that was a moment where he wasn't he didn't move the way you would expect him to move. That one was on him, not AJ.
Yeah,
But,
no, but AJ didn't freak out about it like
no,
he
I
has in the
understand.
past.
I
And so that's,
understand the point. I just don't know whether that's as much a sign of him maturing in that way, or whether it's, a reflection of where MSU's entire team was at.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's entirely
Yesterday.
possible as well.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and I think to that extent, and the emotional aspect, I think a good example is Joey Hauser, who was, by self accounts and by many accounts, he was really deeply affected by COVID and the isolation and and so I think people, it's easy to forget, but they are humans right out there. And I think, they respond to trauma and isolation different ways. And so anyway, that's why I think, there's still going to be, I think you need to have a little bit of grace for this team for at least a game or two more, just as they try and figure things out and get back to normal.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, there are going to be people who hear
well,
that,
yeah, they're always idiots.
But I think the people who hear that are the people who tend to understand that intuitively anyway, even when they're not in a crisis, that they're human beings. And, there's a difference between what I hope that we're doing, which is talking about things that happen or need to happen factually. So
yeah,
it's totally fine in my book to say, look, Michigan State didn't rebound well at all defensively against Michigan. It had a lot to do with why they lost the game. Those are facts. That's legitimate. To then talk about how you wish this guy would be, put on a bus to Virginia Commonwealth, or,
yeah, right.
This one never should have been given a scholarship. That's the stuff that now more than ever, but you know what? Not just now, always should be in mind when you talk about this stuff, and I imagine a lot of our listeners are on one form of social media or another. Keep it in mind, before you press post, that these are human beings, and that in this case especially, they're not adults, and I don't want to hear, well, they're old enough to vote, they're old enough to drink, they're old enough to have an NIL deal. No. Good recent research says that brains aren't fully developed until you're about 25. By that standard, there's nobody on Michigan State's team that's truly an adult. So,
No.
Yes, I think at the very least, what you said, that they deserve some continued grace for whatever might happen on the court, is sound. That's an understatement.
Yeah, and I feel, looking back, especially like with Joey specifically with that COVID, I think you underappreciated sort of the effect that could have on the kids, and I think we didn't really pay attention to that, and we probably should have more. I think just recognizing how hard that stress was, and the same thing goes for right now. And I would recommend, if you're getting angry, and just check out for 24 hours from wherever you are that's getting you upset, because it helped me a ton this weekend. It is funny. There's a draw. You feel sort of compelled to check it out, but it's better just to stay away for a little bit and just come back and you'll feel better about humanity a little bit, because you'll see normal people, at Meyer or wherever, acting normally, as opposed to lunatics and, idiots online.
One more comment on that. I suspect that if you were in the building at Chrysler Arena last night and you didn't look at social media, you probably felt reasonably good about the state of humanity. Yes. Right?
Yeah.
Give them credit. They did what you would hope they would do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we've got these other spheres that many of us tend to operate in, and it's not always so cut and dried as a positive. But boy, you'd love to believe that somebody somewhere learned something from all of this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I look at them, and they're, those kids who are in the crowd, almost undoubtedly they know one or two, if not more, kids that are on Michigan State's campus and vice versa, right? I mean, it was a Michigan thing that happened. I mean, had they been playing Minnesota, there wouldn't have been the same connection, but there's definitely a connection there with these kids. I'm sure they had kids in their own high school who went to Michigan State. And so I think, again, it is what it is. It's happened, and hopefully everyone, moves on, and we are better people in some ways for something that you hate, for terrible things to happen. And it drives me crazy that, you look for the good of things, but unfortunately bad things happen. And you hope that if something bad has to happen, and it happened, that there's something good can come of it. And, not that you worry about something trivial things, but like real things that actually make a difference. And so anyway, I guess we'll leave it at that, and we'll talk to everyone after the Indiana game. I would remind you to go to nudgeprinting.com. You get 20% off checkout if you enter the coupon code Final4 on checkout. You can get the Spartan Strong gear there. You can get gear for our show as well to help support us. Also check out Brothers Who Just Do Gutters. Talk to Kurt Saufer if you have any gutter problems, and it is getting close to that season, spring, where you're going to start having leakiness everywhere around your house. It's a good way to keep taking care of things. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.
I'm BJ Kissel, CEO of KC Sports Network. I'm one of 20 different hosts over at KCSN, which is proudly part of the Blue Wire Network, as we're the go-to place for coverage on the Kansas City Chiefs, Kansas City Royals, K-State Wildcats, the Missouri Tigers, and the Kansas Jayhawks. At KC Sports Network, we've got former players, current and former beat writers, and the most informed content and analysis you can find on any of these teams. Each of our 24 shows gives you something a little bit different, which means there's something for everyone. Search KC Sports Network wherever you listen to podcasts.